Hello, happy Monday. Welcome to another week of Bible Story Children's Times. And welcome to Old Testament Monday. I'm so glad you could make it. Join us today. So, over the weekend, I was at Walgreens and I saw something that reminded me of a Bible story. And it's something seasonal. Saw this guy, or this person, I guess I should say. So, you get a good look? Okay. And he or she, to be fair, reminded me of a story from the Bible. Now I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking of the story from Ezekiel in the Valley of the Dry Bones. And that's a really, really good guess. But that's not it. This is actually reminded me of a story from Genesis. And it's one that we don't talk about a lot. So I thought it would be interesting to visit it. This comes from Genesis chapter 23. And it has to do with the death of Sarah, who had been Abraham's wife. And I'm just going to start out by reading, and then we'll get to talking a little bit more about what happened and about our new friend here. Genesis chapter 23, verse 1 begins, Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. So Abraham was very sad when his wife died. So she was 127, so they must have been together a very long time, because we remember that they were married for quite a while before they were ever able to have a child. And the child they had together was Isaac. And that was basically a miracle from God. So, the place where she died is significant because it's near or in Hebron, which was a commercial center in that part of Judea at the time. And it was kind of where Abraham and his family tended to hang out for most of their time in Canaan. So, she dies there. Abraham mourns for her. And then he goes to the local people, the Hittites. And as was the custom in those days, people would sit outside the city gates. There would be benches, and they would conduct business. And we've seen that before in other passages where that's kind of, the city gate was often the place where stuff happened. Kind of like our town square, or what used to be in the old days, the town square was where things would happen. Nowadays it's online. It's a different story. But Abraham went to the gates where people gathered, and he said, you know what? I know I'm a foreigner, and I'm a stranger among you. But I would like you to sell me some property for a burial site so that I can bury my dead. The Hittites, for their part, respond very graciously. They say, hey, dude, Abraham, listen to us. You are a mighty prince. You've done a lot of stuff. You're an important guy. So you can bury your dead anywhere here in the choicest tomb that you would like to pick. Just let us know whose tomb you want to use, and we won't refuse it to you. And Abraham was touched by this. This was great generosity. But he bowed before them and he said, you know what? If you're willing to let me do that, if you are willing to let me bury my dead on your land, then I ask you to intercede with Ephron, son of Zach. No, that's not true. It's Ephron, son of Zohar. Ask him to please let me buy the cave of, and I'm going to read this, cave of Machpelah, which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell me the cave of Machpelah for full price. I will pay full price for it, so that I can bury my family, bury my dead among you. Now, Ephron the Hittite happened to be sitting there. And he responded to Abraham and he said, No, dude, listen to me. I will give you the field. And I will give you the cave. You don't have to pay for it. In the presence of my people, and there were other people, other Hittites around, he said, in the presence of all these people, I will give you my land and my cave so that you may use it to bury your dead. Abraham, again, touched by the generosity, bowed down, and he said, no, listen to me, please. I will pay full price for these things. Accept my payment. Accept my paying you full price. And let me bury my dead there. Now we have this kind of duel going on, where they're both trying to do something outside the norms, but something very nice. So Ephron listens to Abraham and he says, no, look. This land, the field and the cave, it's worth about 400 shekels. Now, that's about 10 pounds of silver. So that was a substantial sum in those days. He said, it's worth about 400 shekels of silver. But what is that between you and I? Let's bury your dead. Abraham took that as an acceptance that Ephron would sell the land. And he accepted Ephron's terms for 400 shekels, and he weighed out for him on a scale the complete weight of what he would owe. And then he paid that to Ephron. So, I will read the last verse or two of the story. So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field, were deeded to Abraham as his property. Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, in the land of Canaan. Now Mamre has other significance in the story of Abraham. Mamre, the full name is Elonai Mamre, which means the oaks of Mamre. That was the place where they were living, kind of camped out actually, But that is the place where they were living when the angels came to announce to Abraham and Sarah that they were going to have a child, when Sarah was already past childbearing years. So it was a significant place. It's kind of the place where their life began as patriarch and matriarch of the people of Israel. What would become the people of Israel, the children of the covenant. So it was really fitting that she would be buried there. Now, question is, why did this remind me, other than, being kind of deadish looking, why did this remind me of the story of Sarah and her burial at Mamre? It has to do with burial customs at the time. And this is why Abraham wanted to buy this cave. Because at this time, when people died, at least when people of means died, they weren't just buried in the ground the way we do it today. They were buried in caves, or they were buried in tombs that were cut into rock. And these would be kind of like largish things. They would be maybe the size of the office that I'm in here, or the size of the room that you're watching this in. Because they didn't just house a person when they were buried. There was more to it than that. When somebody died, somebody like Sarah, when she was laid to rest, she would be laid on kind of a shelf or a table, built into the wall. And they would be left there for, I think, if I'm recalling tradition properly, they'd be left there for about a year. And nature would take its course with the body. And at the end of that time, you would basically be left with this. At the end of the year, the people would come and they would either gather the bones into another container, which would then be put into a niche in the wall in the tomb, or sometimes the bones then, depending on the size of the tomb, the bones would just be pushed to the back. And then when the next person died, the same thing would happen. They would be laid there. After a year, they would be bones. Those bones would either be gathered into a box and marked, Sarah or Abraham or whatever, or the bones would be pushed back. And if they were pushed back, they would be pushed in among the bones of whoever was there before. And that was done as part of this whole idea of keeping family together. And it really tied the family to the land, because they would do this on their land, their property. And it reinforced why keeping property in the family was important as it was. It also had an effect possibly on language, because remember we talked about the bones being pushed back in with other bones? There's a phrase that's used occasionally in the Old Testament, and I know specifically it's used for Abraham, when Abraham dies, where they say Abraham was gathered to his ancestors. And that probably references this custom of gathering the bones together and putting them with the other bones of ancestors and eventually descendants. So it's a really interesting custom that they had, and it was a way of showing reverence. It was a way of holding the family together, and it was a way of showing reverence for the person who had died. And it's significant here also because they're showing this kind of reverence to a woman. In church, during sermons, I will make jokes sometimes about the fact that in many stories, we never even hear the wife's name. It's just so-and-so married, and that's it. We don't know who it was. Or a woman did this, and we don't know who it was. But here it's Sarah. Sarah was there from the beginning of the story of Abraham. And Sarah is treated with respect, and she is gathered in, or will be at least, gathered in with her descendants when the time comes for others to pass away. And indeed, in this tomb in Mamre, by tradition, Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah were all eventually interred there in that single tomb. We no longer know where the tomb was. There are traditions, but who knows if that's where it actually is. If they're there, that is a place where the original, the most important core founding members of the children of Israel were all buried in one place, all together, and have slumbered there for thousands of years. To me, that's a pretty awesome thought. And it would be quite the thing to discover, for sure. But that's why this reminded me of the story of Sarah and the purchase of the cave that would become her tomb, and also of how important she was to the Hebrew culture. And I think that about takes us to the end of the story. But I want you to remember how important she was. And I want you to just keep in the back of your mind how much they revered their ancestors in general, and the idea of family in general, that they would hold traditions like this. So, we will see you back here tomorrow, New Testament Tuesday. We'll have something fresh for you from the New Testament. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great evening.